Right. So today we're talking about speed, particularly what we call speed, the thinking process around why we do speed training and what that looks like. And then we're going to look at backstroke as well. So we'll try and keep it to a sort of about 45 minutes on each at the top end. We might not have that much to talk about with Lawrence not here. Lawrence says his apologies. But yeah, I have ideas on this, but I'm keen to hear what you guys think in terms of how we use speed, why we do these things. Is it just because it's something that we've always been told you've got to, and are there any alternative methods? You know, that's what I'd like to explore within speed. Yes, anyone want to jump in with how they use speed in their program?
You want me to kick off?
Go on, Ads.
Okay. Fundamentally, I'll probably only do one out-and-out speed set a week. There would be elements of speed in warm-ups, prep sets to prepare the swimmers for whatever the target, whether it be heart rate, lactate tolerance, production, race pace, whatever I'll be doing. There'll be elements of speed in terms of firing up the muscle fibers ready to perform. But in terms of out-and-out speed, whether it be a 15-meter underwater burst, whether it be from a block, from a push, with fins, without fins. But for me, it's about trying to simulate the fastest possible way of moving through the water. A simple test set that I would use would be something simpler as 825s, hard as you can. I think anything beyond that, I think the critical speed, for a 50 would be 95%, maybe even a little bit less. Well, there would be less for 100. You're not going to go your out and out speed for 100 meters. It will be a percentage down on maximum, which is 100%. So for me, out and out speed is 100% of what you can do, and I think you can do that for 25 meters. So simply, I think to simplify, that's how I would use it within my program, and I would probably only use it once a week as a key set, and I would probably then it just integrate little spikes, throughout different parts of the week as well.
So do you think they're ready to use 100% speed during warm-ups? Or do you think that's possible?
I think it depends on where you position it within the warm-up. And again, it's about kind of preparatory kind of work. So it wouldn't be like 100 meters and then go 425s max on the water. It would be, I would say, between 1500 and 2.4K of kind of skills warming up. And then the key set would be 825s, and there'd be spikes within that warm up. It might be 3 max fly kicks off the wall. It'd just be something about kind of getting those fibers ready to kind of perform when I would do the 825, so that they're ready to, not too much, but also that they're ready not just to have the first 1, 2, 3 reps being put in the bin because they're not ready. With underwater phases and things like that, you could say, well, why do I do it if they don't do it properly? But I do find sometimes that they actually don't do it at the required intensity. If I'm being honest, you say, right, I want to do 10 meters max fly kick underwater, 825s alternating fly kick on back to 10 meters max underwater, or 15 meters, or whatever it might be. They probably actually don't do it at that intensity. So you could say, well, why am I doing that? And it's just another way of trying to get the fly kick development work, which I spoke about, trying to get at least 500 meters within, whether it would just be plain fly kick on back, whether it be a variety of it, or whether it be actual kind of quality stuff. But I do try to tend to, when I have to do 825, depending on where I'm at in the season. And there's some weeks that I won't do that. But I would put, from the blocks, and monitor 15 meters max underwater, and then 15 meters max breakout speed. Get to 15 as quick as you want. But I think it's got to be measurable. I think if you're doing speed, it has to be done at that intensity. I know it depends on the adaptations and things like that, and points in the season and fitness, but it has to be close to the best. If they're 2-3 seconds, what's the point of doing it? So it has to be specific to the energy system that you're working with, that CP system. I think if you're not working that, don't do it.
Noel, you got anything on?
This is where I'm going to sound like an absolute nerd now. So particularly like I said before, sort of like I used to be very much like anaerobic threshold sort of work. I'm very, very AT heavy. And I really love going into the science of things. So for me, I feel with a lot of coaching or coaching in general, when you're prescribing speed work, comes a lot more down to your definition. For me, I think definition of speed, obviously I split my whole thinking in 3 different zones. So you got your aerobic, anaerobic, and then phosphogenic. And I feel the speed comes in the phosphogenic. Anaerobic for me is race pace. And I think there can be a bit of a bit of a grey line, Joe, there's some misunderstanding of phosphogenic and anaerobic. If I ask them to go, let's say, I don't know, 450s stand, Joe, 450s max off, say, like 5 minutes, a lot of swimmers or some coaches might look at that as just a speed set, whereas I don't see that as a speed set. I feel that's a lot more around an anaerobic set. But it's the initial movement off the block, the underwater phase, entry, off the turn, all the explosive movements to me is speed or speed related. And you can only really hold your speed, can't you? Or like that phosphogenic energy transfer system for around about 10 seconds maximum of before you start going into anaerobic. So even if you look at sort of like the energy transfer systems across different events, like I think it's like 80% is on a 50 is like phosphogenic, and then the remaining 10% is anaerobic. And it's where you start engaging and pushing through. So even from, say, like, if I'm looking at a 50 swimmer, I feel the speed element to a 50 is not the entire 50. The speed element is a start. The speed element is the engagement of the underwater phase. And then the speed or the actual excessive force part where you start going to that phosphogenic delivery system is the last 10 meters. 15 for some, just depends. The main body of the swim is obviously coming from the sort of like 15 to the 35 mark. So when I'm doing specific speed work, we'll tend to sort of like have a sort of set where we might go 32.25s, where it's like max to 15, off around about a minute's rest. It takes us half an hour to get through, but it's max to 15 where they're working specified drive off the wall, or they might go from a turn into the underwater work, think about the transition and just swimming max to 15. The rest of the 10 meter is just chill. Or we might split it and go odds as max to 15, evens as last 10 max, and just working race finish. That's how I sort of like do speed as such. And then I think you can go into speed endurance, which then becomes an anaerobic set. That's my thoughts on it. I think its place is very important, and I think there should always be an element of speed to what you do in your program. Always, every session, and a lot of that comes from sort of if you're going to do a race skill, it should be done at race pace as such, and it's just down to the swimmer and how they plan their race, shall we say, as such. And it was something I thought about last week when we were chatting about breaststroke, and it's something when you think about the narrow kick on over the 50 breast, and obviously that kick gets a little bit more accentuated as you go longer, but the shorter the distance and narrower the kick, the wider the outsweep. You're working that snap at the back, aren't you, constantly on the breaststroke, and you're always working that, Jill, sort of like bringing the toes together sort of thing. And that is still a phosphogenic movement or a speed-induced movement. So there's a lot of things I've been going over this week is sort of like, how can I introduce that more? Without relatively sort of like, because I switch between distance that are doing stuff and measurables in distance and then time. Depends. And it sometimes just does my head in. And I was sort of like thinking, I was like, well, if you do vertical kick, kicking as fast as you can, short, narrow kick, keeping yourself up, is that a speed element or is that an anaerobic element? Well, for me, I would say that's a speed element or a phosphogenic element. Keeping that body up and working that snap, but you're only going to be able to hold that for like 5, 6, 7 seconds, if that. But you're still working fast twitch fibers, aren't you? You're still working the whole delivery system of how you're being efficient in the phosphogenic zone. And then that obviously that came to the whole, I was like, oh crap, well, fly kicking, Joel, getting the fins on and kicking as fast as you can upwards, working that snap. And I was just sort of like, so even coming into this week, I'm really thinking, what I have done what I'm looking at changing, and then what I'm wanting to go into is starting to develop already. For me, I split speed into specified low, sort of like low pressured speed work, so 10 in, 10 out, turns, starts, max of 15. And then I tend to do something what we've referred to the kids as speed endurance, so just holding on, trying to hold skill under pressure. So when you are kicking in, say, 32 25s, off whatever you're doing, sort of like you manipulate the quality by the rest, becomes a lot more speed endurance, and you're just sort of like holding that muscle movement under a lot of duress and a lot of pressure. And I agree. And I think, to be fair, I agree with Adam is in regards to like when you're doing speed work, it's got to be quality, but I think it's got to be very short and intense. So, I mean, even if anybody is aware sort of like of like stuff like USRTP, which I openly think is useless, but at the same time, when I look at a lot of the elements of it, it's got its place, and it does work certain energy systems and delivery systems in such an efficient way. So yeah, that's my thoughts on
I want to jump back in before Lee goes, because I know Lee's got really strong and valid points on speed, and I just want to kind of give him more ammunition to shoot us down. The USRPTA, again, I agree with Noel. I think I've just come off a call, 9 hours of over the last three-hour session about the Bob Chaffeen system or model, and the elements about protecting glycogen stores. And again, there's lots of models out there, and it's one of my. I'm aware of it, but it's one of my first kind of forays into trying to understand it and maybe perhaps implement it within a training program. And it just got me, again, very similar to Noel. It gets you thinking about what you're doing and how you're protecting those glycogen stores. So if you're trying to, so my point is, if you're trying to go work on speed, but you're actually working into a different system, are you? And then you've got, in the evening or the day after, are you actually protecting those glycogen stores in order for you to get the most out of that soft heart rate set or, a race pace specific set? So you can say, well, speed is race pace, it could be 400 race pace. That's the speed that you want to do. But for me, critical speed is literally the fastest or highest percentage that you can go. Now I do power sets as well, which I know Lee does, and I think they're again placed within the program where you increase surface area through paddles, resistance, fins. I class that as power because you are increasing force upon the water because of the surface area, and therefore you are going to go faster, so you've got a higher speed. But for me, that specific area would come under a power element. So yeah, for speed, it's sheer swim speed for a period of up to maybe 12, 13 seconds. And like I say, there is a slight crossover. But I'll let Lee go on, because I know you've got lots of things that I know you do really well with your swimmers.
Well, I mean, like I say, you've built me up there. I feel like a bit of pressure now. In terms of what we call speed and what is speed. Speed is a measurement of how fast a swimmer is traveling. So you could call anything speed, and I think it does come down to what we actually call it. I tend to call what I thought we were talking about today in terms of the absolute anaerobic, I call that basic speed. And the amount of people that say, well, that's a stupid, and I don't even know where that came from. It's all basic speed or all out speed. Do you know what I mean? Like trying to replicate base speed or faster than for really short bursts. And then like you say, then there is a speed endurance, or where you come out of what, once you've used what you can anaerobically, and then we go into the lactate production, lactate tolerance sort of training systems. One way I got explained to me, and I thought it was brilliant, and it was the rev counter on a car. And actually, a lot of people think, oh, well, your fastest bit would be when it's right up at the top end, but that's actually the weakest part of the car. The most powerful, the most explosive part of the car's engine sort of scale is that 0 to like 1,000 revs, the ability to move it off the line, if you like. And then it's a scale. and it's a graded. Now, for me, you've got basic speed at the bottom, all out speed. Every race starts with a really explosive factor, be it a backstroke start or a dive. So you are using that system before you're using anything else. And then once that's gone, then we go into the lactic acid system of producing energy. And then once hopefully we're not going to go too far into that before we settle into an aerobic level on longer races, and that's where you have to decide how much you're going to put into the race. But for me, I don't think there's a point in separating and trying to train a specific area. I think 9 times out of 10, you've got to allow that scale to happen. You've got to allow that rise from all out speed going into, and it's how far into you go. You know, some days we'll just do 15s. Depending on where we are in the cycle, we might do a 15-meter burst, and then we always swim down. And I don't really know why. It's sort of, this has made me question, excuse me, why do we always swim down after basic speed? I mean, our sort of standard basic speed is a 25 or somewhere between 20 and 35 meters at max, and then finish the rest of the 200. And we'll do that 10 times. And it's active recovery, I know that, but I don't know why we don't do it, because we don't do that for anything else. We don't say you have to have a recovery. And until it comes to a point where, I don't know, where it's too far. We were always told when we were growing up and learning as coaches, you never train speed to fatigue. It's like, well, then for me, that means you'll never find out what the limit is. You'll never find out how far you can go before you start to blow up. And I think we have to go there. And that then conditions the body to next time probably be a little bit tougher and buffer a little bit better. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of asking the athletes to do that. And I wasn't afraid of that as an athlete myself. And a point there is, I do these things because this is what I did, because this is what I was taught to do. And my coach did really, he was a maverick at the time. Do you know what I mean? Nobody was doing what our coach was doing, but he was producing Olympians, he was producing series. You know, you had to have a national medal to get in our top squad, and there was 20 of us. And that was, you know, just being at nationals or making a national final wasn't good enough to make the top squad at Liverpool when we were there. That's how serious that level was. But he didn't do a lot of the same things that everybody else was doing at the time. Sorry, I got off topic there. But one thing we always did was we trained speed to fatigue. We went to that point where, how do you know what too fast is unless you've been there? And anyone that's worked with me on poolside will have heard me say that. How do you know what your limits are? Have you ever been there? And it might only be, you know, we do add resistance, we do paddles, we do a lot of fast work with fins on. We dive 50s with fins on, and we'll say we'll time it to 25 to feet or to 35s, and then we measure kind of meters per second swims over 20, 25, 30. I like the 35 for actually calculating meters per second and then doing a sort of a predicted 50 score. I like that idea because it gives them something to. You're not going to get them to swim PBs in training, or very, very rare you can give a kid and say, I want you to swim a PB pace. It doesn't tend to work. Whereas if you say, I want you to try and go 35 meters, we'll do the little calculation, and they get it becomes a bit of a game then. And then we end up there. And they go, actually, yeah, that was close to PB. Then like you say, I find that it's not about training just the specific explosive movements. It's about how much of the process you give them at a certain point in the season. So we might start with 10s and 15s from dives, always swimming down. And then we might go on, if it's a tough week, we might say, right, we're doing 35s today. And that is, I acknowledge that is pure anaerobic into lactate production because they're still working. But like I say, why wouldn't we? Why are we so afraid of training speed to fatigue? I don't understand that. And nobody's really been able to give me the science other than, well, it's, like you say, nobody's been able to tell me why. Anyone I've asked, they can give me a lot of science and but I've never seen any reason as to why we can't do this as coaches. And
just a question off that, Lee, just to put in it. What do you find in terms of you pushing them to fatigue? What do you find happens with the athletes in terms of adaptation? Big adaptations, smaller adaptations? Do you force them? Do certain athletes prefer bigger ones, smaller ones? And do you force them, or do you just let them naturally happen? And there's loads of questions there. And how often do they happen?
Do you know what? Because we do it that often, because we go there most sessions. It's not as recognisable. We see significant drop off when we're in training to gala results, to race swims, and we tend to find the biggest. It almost pushes them into this kind of place where we call it 2% swimming. You know, so you go to a competition and like a Lancashire's, let's say, and unless they're chasing qualifying times, we say, we want you within 2% of PB here. And that's kind of accepted. But then when we taper, when we know we've done that taper, that's when they really shoot through. But they don't tend to have an up and down because of that sort of work. It's whether or not because they've been training with me for such a long time that they become used to it and capable of tolerating that work. Maybe because it's something that that's their bread and butter, the fast stuff, the speed work. And like I say, I think people get this idea that Lee's wants to be a sprint coach. I don't think it is. I don't think it's that. I think I coach what's best for the materials I've got. And on the Isle of Man, I've got about 8 lads that are over 6.5 foot tall. They just growing really big over there. Thanks to fresh air. But like I say, they've got all the weapons. Got great big hands, big feet. We breed some really, really big, strong kids over there. So why wouldn't we do the fast stuff? And they tend to like it as well,
Yeah, I think I've come off another call, 2.5 hours, and we discussed this model that is, the perception perhaps could be boring. Repetitive things are always boring, whether you do 825s every week, whether you do 8 1000s every week. There's arguments to say it can be repetitive and boring. Now, the model that I've just been discussing, basically, anything up to 88% of your weekly work for an age grouper or even a senior swimmer is done at 50 beats below. Now, that can be, if you've got an age group kid doing, I know we're coming off topic here a little bit, 50 beats below for if they're doing a 50,000 week, you might only have 5,000 meters of quality work scheduled in that week. That's 45,000 of 50 beats below work in this particular model. With fat metabolism, protecting the glycogen stores, so the different areas are protected. Now, we spoke about David Davis. So I'm kind of David Davis, obviously, in 2004, I think he went 14:45.9. I think in 2008 at the Olympics, he went 0.2 slower with 14:46.1. Now, his PB, I think, was you had guys going 3:45 for 400 and finishing the 1500 in 4:49, and David didn't have that turn of speed, so he couldn't live with them in that aspect. But he was 6'3". So I'm giving you a contradicting kind of. I know obviously Dave's been around for a long time, and he went into marathon swimming, and he followed this model with Dave Haller from 2001 through to working with Kev going into 2008, where he changed the stimulus. But he's got the guy with the weapons. He was long levered, musculature he probably wasn't. He was quite wiry. Well, he was wiry. So have you ever found, having said that, you've got these tools and weapons that are there, have you found that you've tried other things rather than the speed aspect, or is it just because you feel like that physiologically the somatotite lends himself to just doing the speed?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, like you say, you've known me as a coach for probably as long as I've been coaching, 20 years, maybe something like that. Yeah, and I've had all sorts of swimmers. I've had 1,500 guys. I've had 400 swimmers. I've had 200 backstrokers, 200 fly swimmers. It's not been the case that I honestly think right now, I think kids prefer the fast stuff, and whether or not that's because that's how I do it. Maybe you if you were producing lots and lots of 200 swimmers, it might just be that you have a method that makes the 200 trainer more exciting, more palatable, more buy-in. Maybe you just got mental kids that are just love the work. You know what I mean? Love a good thrashing. I can't put my finger on why that happens, but
so. Sorry,
go on now.
So like when you're listening to like any coach talk, and this is a thing, like I said earlier, and it's exactly what you said. It's your definition of speed, that coach's definition of speed, that dictates the philosophy or the model that they then prescribe their swimmers of what they've got in the pool. Now, like you said there, you can only coach what's in front of you, in essence. Like you coach to your audience, don't you? I can't remember what the guy was called. Was it Albrecht who was the Dutch coach for a while, and he literally just did like a complete sort of like national sort of thing of the swimmers over there, and it's like, well, females tend to be like I think it's 5'9" to 6'1", like the sort of genetic build of them were just, in his sense, or he felt, were built for sprinting. And going off that sort of the Trafine stuff is where you're setting them up to go further on later on. Now, equally, like I'd said there, it's boring. Imagine doing like 88% of your work just aerobic swimming.
Education is massively important in that. Yeah. You've got to educate parents and the swimmers in terms of the long-term plan.
The best way I ever tried to explain this to the kids is in regards to speed was if we took this 50 meters short course, right? And we said we dive in. That's a phosphogenic movement. That's a speed element. As you dive in the water and you start to move through, what dictates your velocity? What dictates the speed? Is it how much effort you're putting in, or is it the efficiency of what you're doing? Because technically, the more efficient you are, the less energy you have to push or less energy you have to give. If you can hold maximal speed with minimal effort, you're still going fast, aren't you? And it's exactly like we say, like that car rev, Joe thing. If you over rev it, the wheel's going to start spinning on the tarmac. It ain't gripping. It's not doing anything. So there's the sense of understanding that sweet spot. And I feel that's where the speed comes from. Overdoing it, so like spinning, and I love doing Joe the I can't remember. We call it vertical swim, Joe, vertical backstroke, the bathtub drill thing where you just sit up just spin, and the kids love it. Like it's just fun. So I'll tell you what, let's just go like 425s off, God knows what, and just spin. Or we'll add a lot of sort of resistance work. So something I quite like doing is we'll have fins on them, and they'll be in pairs. Someone will grab hold of the ankles and they'll swim to the 12 and a half, and then when he gets 12 and a half, the swimmer behind lets go, and they just let it rip and they let the feet go, head down, and just spin and go for it. I still feel that's a speed movement, but you're working that difference between resistance into assisted swimming. But the whole element or the base of it is efficiency down that 25. So if you're trying to swim fast with someone holding on to you, you've got to be efficient as shit. Sorry. But as soon as you let go, the more efficient you are, the faster you're going to move through the water, the higher you're going to travel up on the water. So, I mean, and again, I wanted to go back to sort of like Lee was saying, sort of pushing the speed element. You got to know where the breaking point is. But then how you then translate that is that breaking point. Did it come from lack of efficiency preceding the bit where it broke down? Or is it due to trainability or your ability physiologically to hold that speed? There's an element there, preceding that moment of breakdown. that's contributing towards that breakdown. So like, I love we'll do stand-up 50s at the end of aerobic sets, and I really do believe in doing that, because they've got to man up, but they've got to think a little bit more about the process. They've got to drive off the block, and then they've got to be exceptionally efficient under the water. They've got to be efficient into the turn. They've got to be efficient on the finish. All that sort of stuff, where they're trying to practice the race speed under duress and under extreme pressure, and they've got to try and turn that instead of switching off and just swimming, they've got to engage the brain a little bit more.
Sorry, can I just jump in on you there, mate? One thing I have been asked and I've spoken about is, do we need, I know you're saying, is it about the technical breakdown, or is it about the time spent and the fact that the body can only do this for so long? Does it have to be specific, or are we working a stroke, or are we working an energy system when we're talking about speed? And what I mean by that is, I've spoken a couple of times about some work I did with John Rudd, and he said that when they're working with their absolute top end sprinters, don't necessarily do it in the water. They'll have a ski erg on poolside, or a Concept 2 rower, something like that, and they'll say, right, you're training for 20, let's say worst case scenario, 22 seconds. So they do 22 seconds worth of effort on a relatively full body exercise. Does it matter whether it's specific or not? And I've played with this in the gym with my seniors, and actually, to say, like, on a great game is the Concept 2 rower, and you start them off and you say, right, what's your PB? PB is 22 flat. Right, you're going to swim 22 seconds. You're going to see how many meters you can get out in that 22 seconds, and you make them row for their PB time, and you measure, and you can actually measure the force they can put out in that time. Okay, they're not used to being on the rower, or they're not used to doing these things, but they're still working bloody hard for that same amount of time. And I really liked that idea, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give that a go. And that's one of our sort of land training secrets, that we work for the time that they're going to be. We're trying to access those energy systems in different formats. Do you know what I mean? Don't know what you thought.
I think that's really a really good idea. That really good idea, because you've got the variety, you've got the purpose and the outcome, the desired outcome that you want. My only thought process in my brain, yes, you are tapping into the energy system. Are you tapping into the specific muscle group needed in that particular race? That would be my only question, really, in terms of that. I think it's really good, tapping into that energy system, but the specific muscle groups that are required to be put under pressure in a given training set, providing that you're doing that in the pool, which I'm sure you are anyway, you're probably getting the desired outcome in that area as well.
I'm gonna counter that. If you're doing all of your race pace work, or all of your speed work, sorry, not race pace, that's another week. All of your speed work on your stroke, be it fly, back, whatever your stroke is, your body can only take so much of that. But if you then say, right, we're going to do it with a different set of muscles, does that give you an opportunity to do more of it? And this is honestly me thinking out loud now, because one thing my lot do quite differently, we don't do as much in the water, but they all do quite a lot in the gym. And I'm wondering whether actually they're still training those energy systems, but around a different musculature and a different setup. Is it a case that we can't do that because the body can't take it, and we'd be using more of those muscle groups? Or is it the fact that the energy system hasn't got that much in it, so it needs X amount of rest? And I wonder whether, and like I say, I don't know the answer to this. I'm sort of throwing this out as it's just come into my head. Actually, it could be the case that we can do more of it by isolating the legs. Get them on a watt bike and see how many watts you can put out for 21 seconds, whatever it might be. That's something that's not specific to the stroke, but still allows, and that comes with points in the season as well. But then again, if you're doing 4,000 meters, 3,500, 4,000 meters in a session, you're doing plenty of work on the stroke work, on the skill, on the efficiency stuff. Doesn't always have to be that. It's an interesting one. Like you say, we'll have to have a look at it.
This is a thing I sort of really strongly feel about is like, and this is what I quite like about sort of like you, Lee, is like, there's elements in your program that you've got to still keep in from age group, entry level, all the way through to your senior swimmers or your older swimmers. There's got to be an element that, or Joe, constant through all the programs I move through. And my biggest feeling on that is the fact, sort of like, and I still encourage our the younger swimmers in my program to do speed work, even if it's like 20 meters, 15 meters, just to know what it's like to swim fast, because ultimately that's what we're trying to get these kids to do. The lads click onto it a lot quicker because they're like racing. But it's something that stems back when I used to have a swimmer, and he was a really good triathlete. Like really, really good, really, really fit. Wasn't really interested in the pool all that much, but we just couldn't get him to swim fast at any point as he got older. And I just feel like them fast twitch was never really trained properly because he was just going out doing sort of like stupid half marathons every other day. And they're not stupid. I mean, the fact's like he'd just get out and he was, if he was bored, he would literally go on like a 20-mile bike ride and then come back in, have some dinner and go out on like another 40-mile run or something stupid like. But he was always like that constant pace. Do you know what I mean? He'd never been, like you said before, to that point. So when all of a sudden you introduce it when he gets older, he's got nothing to go to. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know his head from his ass. And so I've always felt, particularly from like a young age, you've got to still have that whole element of speed going through. So when you do kick on and the later on, they've got a lot more tools in the box. When you start event specifying, you start stroke specifying, you start looking, well, is this kid going to be a 50, 100, 200, 400, something like that? They've got that speed element now. So I think it's really important. It's something that, again, I've always, and I do think back to you in regards to you, Lee, is like, I like to keep that element of speed through, even if sort of like it is a constant in the week, just that element where they get to swim fast, they get to even just do a stand-up 50 for the younger ones and maybe PB in training and be like, oh my God, I just went 32. Well, why did you just do 32? Well, it's because actually you were a lot faster into your turn. You took your rate up. You kicked off a lot more efficiently. Like you didn't breathe in the last 10. And then you'll see some psycho lads who like, I mean, do you know what I mean? So I don't know if I just went off tangent there.
I like that.
That's spot on, that. Really spot on, I think. I totally agree with everything that you just said, pretty much. I do that. I mean, I for the obviously I took over Lee's job many years ago now, and I always integrated basic speed, what I've just discussed earlier, into every working week, including 1500 swimmers, open water swimmers. I would integrate that because there are elements in the race that they'll need to try and change gear and recruit, those muscle fibers. I've had in the last 5 years, I've had, well, maybe even longer now. Christ, I've had two swimmers go 16:45, three swimmers, sorry, go 16:45 in the 14-year-old age group at nationals, and all three of them finished fourth. And one of them in particular got overtaken in the last 25 meters by some guy who could swim faster or turn it on a little bit more. So I always try and, as much as I've can maybe challenged the idea of it, working between predominantly 12 and 16-year-olds, I do integrate that into the system more. I've probably been guilty of not specifying early enough with certain athletes, just because I wanted them. I still wanted to do something, but maybe not overloaded as much as maybe other coaches have. But I do think all elements, we're talking about speed, but aerobic development, VO2 max kind of work. I think obviously skill and skill acquisition and efficiency is key, but I think all elements need to be included. And going back to speed, I do think it's vitally important at all ages because they need to be able to swim fast.
I'm going to jump on that. I've always used fast stuff with our younger ones, and I don't mean. I'm aware you can overdo the fast stuff when they're sort of just hitting puberty through to about 14, 15, that's the time for building an engine. Do you know what I mean? That's accepted. But I never shied them away from trying to be fast, and especially the pre-puberty guys. You know, the 8s, 9s, 10s. They just want to race, and some people, you know, watch them and go, "Oh, that kid just races everything. He's not thinking technical. All he wants to do is win." And sometimes you have to say, "Do you know what? Is that the worst thing in the world? That he wants to? If he's not listening and he's not doing what you're telling him, then yeah, you have to pull him back some days, and some days you have to go, do you know what? That's just the way he is, and he loves it. If it's for the right reasons, and it's because, and I'm saying he because I'm thinking about one of ours, and Silla and Heather and James are probably thinking, I know exactly who you're talking about there, but if they're doing it for the right reasons, it teaches them, and like you say, especially on the nights where we often have a pool full of from 9 and 10-year-olds through to 24-year-old Commonwealth finalists. Do you know what I mean? So include them in the set, include them in the work. They're not going to get the same physiological benefit from it, but include them in it, and they're going to think, I did the same set as him over there who's going to Commonwealth Games, or I did. And it gives them that something that they can look over there and go, God, he must have been working so much harder than me because he's like on the floor trying not to be sick now. Or similarly, you know, when we're calling times out and they come in and go, oh, I've just done 36 seconds. And then what did they just shout for them? 23 seconds over on the far lane. I like it as a development, and I never try and shy those kids away from it. The argument that, well, they're not producing lactate, they're not using those energy systems, doesn't mean they can't learn how it's supposed to work. So when they do, they're already halfway there. Yeah. Just on a what we were talking about earlier in terms of the progression at the right ages and stuff. One thing that I was talking about multi-sport kids, and I think we talked about it in the first one of these we did. I honestly think that on the Isle of Man there is that much provision of millions of different sports that they can get into, that actually we do tend to let them come through a bit later. Now, my reasoning that I'm sort of happy about that is that it's keeping them fresh in the sport. And you've probably heard me say, nobody remembers, apart from the kid who was 11-year-old national champion, nobody remembers who was 11-year-old national champion. They remember who went to the Olympics, who made team, who made DJs, who made Olympics, who made whatever it was. That's a far more realistic opportunity for the guys over there. So that's what we're not aiming to try and put kids on into national medals at 14, 15, because we know in a couple of years' time we're going to be trying to get those kids, if they are talented enough, we're going to try and get them on Common Youth. And then we're going to try and get them to the Commonwealth Games. So I think if we look at it as what the challenge, I know this is really relevant to the topic, but if you're looking at what the challenge is, what the end goal is, what the end game is, then you can kind of work back from that. And like you say, whatever systems you're using for the little leagues, I'd say don't be afraid of using any system with any younger athlete, because they need to understand what it's going to feel like so that they're ready and they get it when they come to a 14, 15, and you need them to be able to do it really, really well.
Right, so I'm going to ask two questions really, and it's just a lot of thinking on my head now, just ticking over. But so going back to the definition of speed, sort of like for me thinking now, it's like, well, I find when you've pushed it too far is when the body breaks down, like either physically or technically. But then we talk about energy systems that you're working, but would you class your mental capacity and processing as an energy system as well, something that you can work? And can you work that through duress? I mean, do you feel you do that, Lee? Through what you do you get these guys to work a lot more around the mental side of stuff? Because I think we can all get hooked up, can't we, on what energy system are you using? But you've got to have the intent from the swimmer there to get the intent of the session out. And they've got to know where to go mentally. Only they know how much effort they're putting in. They'll only ever know that. Like, there's so many things we can try and put into place, like heart rate monitors and RPEs and all that sort of stuff, but they know. And if they're doing the work, it will show. If they're not doing the work, it will show. But then do you think that's a contributing factor to that breakdown of speed? So like, if you're watching a set of 25s, let's say, or max of 35s, and where the breakdown's coming in, is that cognitive or is that physical?
That's a tough one, that. I mean,
it can be both, couldn't it?
Yeah, go on, actually. Have you got?
No, there's nothing with any substance, but I think it can be both. But if I'm not getting the desired effect out of the training set that I want, change it. Don't be trying to change it. What's the point of carrying on if you're not getting the effect? If an individual switches off mentally and they're no longer able to perform at the time, I think you use your eyes. You can see whether they're trying to get the rate go. The legs are going, but the arms aren't, or vice versa. I think you can tell whether they are or they're not. I think you also can tell by body language the way that physiologically they're coming out the other side. And I would be like, right, okay, if we're not doing that, if you want to work aerobically or in a different system, you can either have a conversation and try and coax them round, or give them 15s or 20s or whatever you might be doing, or just remove them from the set and give them, something that you feel is going to be of benefit to them. If it's physiologically, I think again you can see whether things are technically breaking down, or you can see, unless you're testing lactate levels and you've got lactate from a 16 to maybe even 18-year-old plus going above 10, then physiologically something's happening there, just to inhibit the results. But then if you're in that position, do you carry on? Do you force them through? For me, if it's a psychological, I'd remove them or change the set. If it's a physical, depending on the outcome that I wanted, and I wanted them to fight through the kind of the lactate levels, then I might be positioned to carry on.
I've got some thoughts on that in terms of, for me, what I'd look at is is it a case of they're not able to hold this mental, to say we're going to do this absolutely perfectly. And that's what we're talking about particularly with basic speed. We're talking about faster than race speed. We're talking about the best possible skills, X, Y, and Z. It's got to be the best you've ever done. And I think that can be tough. If we ask them to do even like 8 reps, 10 reps. And I think that's probably why we either give them lots of rest, just to allow them to bring it down and think about it. And I like the idea of them having swimming where they're not thinking on the offside of it, the swim down, where I just say, just plod it. Don't think, just get through, just get the end of each length. And I think sometimes there's a place for that. But in terms of what can you do mentally, what can your body still do when your head's falling off? Do you know what I mean? What is your body still capable of when your head thinks you're done? And I'll use an example. And again, I don't want to think I'm trying to sound showbiz, but when we were at Commies holding camp, we went in on day 1. And the only other team was in with us was South Africa. Now, they are brutal. They're ruthless. And this was 2 weeks out from the games. And it was their last. The coaches were sound, they were talking all about it. And he said, this is our last big set before we come down. And they got to a place where, there was the likes of Tandy, Vanderberg was there, Chad Leclos. And they got to about, I think, whatever the reps were, I can't remember. They got to a point where they were all dying. And the coach turned around, and I think it was like number 8 of a 10 rep set. And the coach turned around and went, if I get X, whatever it was, whatever the desired value was out of this next rep, and he just launched into this speech. It was like something out of 300. And he said, you can have 2 minutes extra rest. You do this and we're done. And we won't swim this afternoon. And you can go to the beach and whatever else it was. And they were beating their chest. They were, screaming and shouting and all that. And he said, I want you to find what else you've got left. He said, because your body, your head will quit 1,000 times before your body's ready to. And it was amazing. I mean, they had like 3 lanes of Commonwealth level athletes. But honestly, the feeling, like the rest of the people in the pool just stopped to watch and they all smashed it. And the coach was like, that's the fastest time he's done all year. And it was one of these things where, like you say, that mental element challenged that. You know, we used to do angry swims where like a stand-up swim, but I'd say, I want you to take a minute, shut your eyes, sit down behind the block and think of something that really, really gets you, really makes you angry. And I had to stop that because kids were like crying and stuff. But actually swimming under that sort of pressure and learning on the mental fatigue side of things was really useful and can be a really useful tool.
It's really interesting because there's a session I did once and it just wasn't firing at all. And we ended up going sort of like it. I think it was like 32.50, something like that, and we ended up doing it in a relay form instead. So for in their head, they just dropped like the set just dropped by a quarter. It was like we took everyone's PB, we split them into teams of 4. We took everyone's PB and just went, right, that is your target time. Like that's your target time. That's the best you've ever swam. If you just do just one round of this, and then we can call it a day. Like I'm happy. If you're showing me you've got a set of balls, and I don't want to see, and a lot of it I do tend to challenge, and I do say a lot to the kids, sort of like, because obviously I like the metal music, and there's a great song called "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor" by Drowning Pool, so we call it "Let the Bollocks Hit the Floor." But a lot of it is sort of like, is that toughen up? Is that getting that the testosterone going, getting the adrenaline pumping, and it's going to just give you that extra little bit. But they all absolutely nailed it. Like we ended up having girls just like swim out of the goddamn skin just so they could get out early. They hated me after, like absolutely hated me. And like none of them spoke to me and said bye or anything or thank you or not a word. But it was really interesting. It is interesting you say that, sort of like playing with the mental aspect as well. And like I'd said last week, sort of like Joe manipulating the mental process to get the desired outcome, I think plays a lot more in speed work, shall we say, or fast swimming. And it is, for me, I honestly feel speed work it's not a definitive sort of like we're going to do X, Y, and Z in numbers. It's just an art form, isn't it? You've got to know your athletes. You've got to know who you've got in front of you, what mental state they're in to keep them swimming 110%, because ultimately that's what you're trying to get them to do, aren't you? So it is a massive game and there's such an art form to it. As opposed to just
that's the art of coaching. You can put all the science, all the sets in front of you, and can give it people with all the information. But it's what you decipher is what your targets are, but also ultimately what you've got in front of you. You've got to look at the swimmer in the eye when they walk onto the poolside. That guy is up for it. That guy's not up for it. And knowing them how far you can push them in a given mood that they're in. And I think it's simply taking time. I mean, I've moved to a new club, as I've said, and I've done 4,000 Zoom sessions, but I've only done 10 weeks on deck. So I don't really know the athletes too well, and it's going to take time. It's going to get time for them to know my little peaks and troughs, and it's also time for me to get to know them and how far I can push and who can push further than others, and manipulate and kind of get them to do what you want them to do in order in their best interest, not what you want because you want to, see them chucking up in a bucket, but it's getting the best out of them in your eyes to get the desired effect.
Yeah, definitely. Guys, shall we have a look at the? Sorry, no. Oh, I was going to say, are we happy to move on to have a little look at Backstroke? I promise.
Yeah, I think today you scheduled this. This is your thing today, isn't it? Speed and backstroke. I actually like coaching backstroke, but I hated swimming it. You can't see where you're going. He's looking up at the ceiling. What's the point? But I do like coaching it. I do like coaching it.
What do you like about it? What's your bit on backstroke?
Again, if it was bullet pointing, I think again similarly to the breaststroke last week, I think there are different styles of swimming backstroke, and again, depending on a swimmer's strengths and weaknesses as to how much of a certain style that you would do. So we've got obviously fundamentally the textbook backstroke would be good rotation, get your armpit down towards the floor, but that then perhaps suffers. You need to have a strong leg kick. And for me, that would be more suited to a 200 backstroke with a lower stroke rate, a deeper catch, and probably a technique that is more sustainable long. Whereas Lee, obviously, I know you did backstroke. What's termed as a kayak backstroke, where it's a shallower pull, but puts a lot more load on the shoulder, would be more suited to a 50 or 100. But it'll enable you to generate more power and a lot higher stroke rate, which is obviously necessary for more suited to a 50 or 100. So again, there's not one thing I would look at, but they would be the two types that I would look at in terms of what the swimmer is able to do in their strengths and weaknesses, and adapting and changing things given a certain distance and a given race or a training set. I want you to swim this. I want you to do this drill. I want you to do that drill, which is going to enable them to get the desired outcome when you transfer it into a pool. Kicking, massively important. Again, on the backstroke, you would probably find that there's probably a deeper amplitude on the kick, whereas obviously faster, you probably have a shorter size on the kick predominantly. And again, probably with a kayak one, you'd stay a lot flatter in the water rather and minimalize rotation than you would do on a deep catch rotational backstroke. So they would be the things that I'd kind of look at.
Good stuff. Well,
as well as the head not moving. Simply, do not move that. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, to be fair, actually, again, I'm going to sound like I chat on with myself. I look for the basics. Someone who can swim backstroke well. But if I'm going to get excited about a backstroke, it's the underwater work I get excited about. If I can see someone kicking out efficiently, continually, I get well excited then. Because for me, I think swimming back is just literally swinging your arms backwards. But knowing, again, a little bit more about the coordination, your body coordination, your awareness of where you are in the pool. It's only stroke where you swim basically without your actual eyes. That makes sense. You can always look for the wall or flat on fly, free and breast. Backstroke, man, it is down to a lot more cognitive. Try and look for the chin. And I do encourage them pushing the chin back a bit more to open the stroke out. Just because I feel when they start dropping the chin, the range that they can get into starts affecting what happens on the back. If they're dropping their chin back a little bit, and sometimes it is just over that sort of like, that 90-degree angle thing where you're looking from the neck from the neutral position, just push a little bit more. Because then what I've found is when the chin dropping, the hand doesn't enter properly and they try to engage a catch phase too early, outside of the pool, outside of the water. So getting them to drop in and look for that deep catch straight away is something I quite like. But ultimately, it's just head still, being able to rotate well, and getting that catch in a little bit earlier, or trying to be more aggressive into the catch phase that I look for in the swim in a backstroker. Again, you can tell when I'm off the wall and just talk because it just makes no sense really. I need to have bullet points.
I'm with you on them. For me, that looking backwards is massive. I think we went through a phase where this kind of chin on the chest and sit up and spin, that happened because of Liam Tancock. But that was because Liam had to be so powerful because he was about 4'6". Sorry, he's not, but he's a very short backstroker, so he had to be super powerful, and he found a way of making that work. But for me, because he was only slight in comparison to the 6'7" guys he was racing, you pull your head forward and think about the flat surface you're presenting to the water. You know, if you've got shoulders the size of mine, that's going to be a significant factor in slowing things down. You push back, really lift that chest up. And I tell my guys to look slightly behind them. I want them to be able to see the flags. Now, this is how I explain it. I want you to see the flags one stroke before you get to the flags. So from seeing the flags, you should be one backstroke stroke before your head actually goes underneath them. And that's like you say, that's a way of explaining it that seems to work with the majority of my swimmers. Some of them don't get it, and because they just don't like backstroke. That's fair enough. But like I say, the head back is, for me, is a big part of it. And the other thing, when we talk about the rotation, I try and keep the hips flat.
Yeah,
but I still want to see rotation. I want to see, you'll never get them kicking straight up and down and getting a great big rotation on it. But what I don't want to see is the rolling onto the side and the hips going with it, because then you end up kicking that way, then kicking that way. It just slows everything down. And even a 200 guy is more so. I want to see the hips nice and flat and as much rotation as we can get around through the torso, whilst keeping the hips as flat as possible. Let's say if the shoulders are rotating, I don't know, 50 degrees, I don't want the hips rotating any more than 25 degrees with them. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? So we limit the amount of rotation at the hip without stopping the rotation at the shoulders as well.
See, this is a process in my head. When I used to think about rotation quite a bit, and it was something I noticed. Like when I used to tell swimmers to rotate from the hips, it just the rate just dropped, and the stroke got so slow. As soon as I told them to rotate from the shoulders and focus on what the shoulders are doing, it got a little bit better. Now it's sort of like, and I try and explain it quite a lot too, and sort of like, obviously we're trying to keep shoulders, let's say, and hips sort of as near we can to alignment. But the time when you want these two to be engaging together or in alignment with each other is when they're going through the throwdown. That's the part where you want them both together, hips and shoulder moving together. The slight overreach there and coming out of Joe and on a deeper angle than what the hips are, I think is fine. And that should happen naturally, because the more you're rotating, the more you've got to get from side to side. And sort of like pretty much like if your feet are constantly kicking like that, it becomes less effective. It needs to be that constant travel. So really just that slight movement from the hips, or natural movement from the hips, I'd say, is what you're looking for, not forced movement from the hips.
Yeah, I agree. No excessive movement from the hips. I totally agree with that. And I always like the armpit down towards the floor. Basically, the head stays still while, like Lee did before. I can't do it because the laptop's going to go flying. But my shoulders would rotate, but my head would stay still. And it just shows the importance of some of the land-based stuff that we do as well. And I'm sure, especially with the freestyle and backstroke, is some of the bigger guys, the stiffer, lads and ladies. The thoracic rotation is vitally important to keep that kind of flexibility and range of movement through that kind of upper part. So you can rotate, but also the hips are not, obviously, so you're not so wooden, and your whole body then goes with it. Because I think that will be a flaw if you're not mobile in that area. You will rotate just like a skewer, like a kebab on a Friday night. You need to make sure that you just stay flat as possible. What are your thoughts on hand position and entry and exit? I know at the old school teaching ways, little finger first and thumb out. Now, for me, I like back of the hand coming out of the water. Finish off the stroke, back of the hand can come out of the water. On entry, predominantly little finger or palm down. I think the little finger would go in, but then the pitch of the hand would change pretty much immediately on the catch. And again, in terms of ways, depending on what stroke you're doing, whether you are literally turning your fingers that way so you can grip and rip it, or whether you push, have your palm pointing down a little bit more to get a little bit more lift, which again would be more suited probably towards the 200, as opposed to the 150. What are your thoughts on those?
I go palm down. I go palm down for entry. Yeah. If I can get a flat, if they've got enough mobility around the shoulder to actually get in palm flat, they're on that catch much sooner. In terms of on the way out, yeah, I'm working a push down to back of the hand exit. Yeah, so almost pushing past the thigh and then back of the hand on the way out. Like I say, as I'm coming through there, I'm trying to create as much rotation in the arm and getting that as much reach as I can. And actually, if they're trying to force into that position where they go in palm down, then actually it increases reach as well. I mean, my shoulder flexibility isn't what it was, but you're getting so much longer in the stroke. If they're just going middle finger, you get that. Little finger, you get that. And then it becomes, it flattens the stroke.
Lee.
Hi, Heather.
Lee, can you just drop your hand so we can see what your hand's doing? Because it's up out of the picture.
Sorry, the big lad.
Set. What I'm saying is I'm looking to get in as close to that position there. So that if that's little finger entry, I want them to rotate past that and almost try and get palm down as they're entering. Before then, we think wrist, elbow, and then from there, it's very similar to a freestyle thinking where we're looking to pitch that anchor and then as straight a line as possible. I'm not looking for that funny, like you see in the textbooks, you know, the bouncy. I want to see them get hold, elbow, and drive straight through. Sorry, I can't get that all on camera, but I'm still looking for straight lines. Still looking for straight lines, we said on freestyle.
In regards to your catch, I feel it's very much down to again how the kids are processing it in their heads. So when you try and say little entry, it's like interesting there during the entering, it is little finger first. But I feel like when you're going in palm backwards, they're rotating too early and they tend to enter the water with the palm and it's affecting the actual throw down at the pivotal part of the stroke and the propulsive phase. So we end up we say to the guys, if this is your body and I want your arm to be kicking out back here, on the repulsive phase, your catch position should be in that, really, shouldn't it? Like it should be at an angle. So I should see one arm going down the side of the body. I should see one arm like this. So we'll get them to just do sort of like something we just call a pull skull, and it is just like arm line by the side. It's like little finger in first there, and then they'll push the hand down like that, and so they'll have their other arm by the side, and they'll just keep pushing and just getting that whole movement and that feel there. I do feel an entry, it should be a little finger, but then it's how they're processing that in their head. I'm looking for the palm down still. In that position, palm down.
Yeah, it's a transition. It's a transition between,
and that's where I notice a lot of the, like when kids just not catching, it's that transition from little finger onto palm, and how that correlates and how that's with the propulsive movement on the other arm. So I'm looking for that push and twist. Don't like it takes them ages to get down the pull. Like it really does take them ages. It's so boring.
Can we touch? I don't know if we didn't really do this the other day, but obviously the backstroke start is slightly different and alien to most other starts that we would ordinarily coach, and maybe we don't do it as often with a group as we should do. I'm guilty of that. What would you think that your setup should be? Again, there's going to be a range of movement, lever lengths that are going to change the position of the ledge. What would your setup position be? Obviously, Lee, you're tall, you're backstroker. I know we didn't use the ledge back in the day. Well, you won't find me using a ledge anyway because I wouldn't be doing backstroke. But how would you set up, or how would you be now coaching the setup for the backstroke starting, able to get the flight and the drive as good as it could be?
For me, there's 2 points I coach on a backstroke start, and the one is keeping the arms straight, allowing the arms to be as straight as possible. I hate that. That absolutely boils my piss. Excuse me, does my head. I can't. Sorry, I've tried so hard to be professional. That there is just so much wasted energy to then do that before the legs start to push. It's like giving someone a 2-foot head start. If you can be in that position with the arms straight, head back, hips in nice and tight,
Back straight.
You're already, then when you push, they're already going. If they're up there on the block, he says go, you do that and then push. It's like spare time. And I say to my guys, I said, you're giving them that much head start, and who's lost the race by that much? Everybody's lost the race by that much. Probably more like that much. So if you're giving them a 2-foot head start, what are we doing that for? The second thing on a start, I would say, I don't like, as much as I've said that I like the hips in, I like the idea of them leaning back, but only so much that you're not tightening the angle at the knee too much. Because I say, I liken it to a really deep squat, you know, an ass to grass squat, if you like, and say, you ain't got a lot of power right down at the bottom. If you can almost sit on your heels, if you then try and explode up and out, there's not a lot of power there. If you can keep your knees at sort of that 90-degree angle, you've got a lot more power. If you were to think about how you would jump the highest, that's the angle your knees need to be in. So in order to do that and stay back, I try and spread the feet a little bit wider so that the knees are kind of in the armpits. And that way they can be closer to, if the knees are in front of them, it bunches everything up, it squashes the lungs, stops them breathing. Whereas if they're a little bit more, the knees a little bit wider than sort of rib cage, it still allows them to breathe in that position. But I'd say don't tighten the knee angle so much that you end up too close and too, what's the word? You know, like when you're too tightly coiled. Yeah, when you're too tightly coiled, you can't explode off. It was just being in that position. But like I say, that soft, the relaxed arms, I don't want them to just be dead straight, because you get that whole locking out thing. You need to have a little bit of bend in it, but it needs to be just enough to still be able to lean back, be in that position, so that when the feet drive you up and off, and then the other thing is you're trying to throw the feet up as high as you can, the Fosbury flop, the high jump at school, trying to kick your feet up.
You've seen the pull boy trick where someone drops a pull boy and you're going to try and kick it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with a lot of that. I mean, I would just add the terminology I would use. Yeah, the vertical jump. You wouldn't jump with your backside on your knees. You wouldn't. Backside. That would be fun. Backside on your heels, and you wouldn't jump with your legs straight. You know, you want to try and find the optimum position. So I always ask them to push the bum away from their heels. So rather than they're thinking they get all compact, they push the bum away, and I think that then enables them to push away and keep that flat back. So I like that. Thanks.
Our progression that we tend to use, and again, I do tend to, I spend a lot of time talking to the kids, which I think they love because they don't have to do anything. But get them to stand on pull side and do a squat jump. And just as they're about to explode, tell them to stop and pause and think about that position that they're currently in. Because for me, that's position, like you say, sort of like the 90-degree angle, like on the knees is the position they want to be on the start. And I sort of like we call it like the slingshot effect. It's like when you're going to pull back, you've got it aimed in the position that you want to go in. Everything's primed and ready to go. As soon as you let go, it goes in the direction that you want. If I tell them, like, I don't know, like hit you, like your ball, I want you to fire it at that particular point there, you're not just going to go and let it go halfway through. You're going to take aim first. And that's what the head's for. Sort of like you're taking aim, or you need that from the top of the spine down to the tail of the spine in that aiming position.
Yeah.
So for me then, rather than just counterbalancing, it's just holding there. And when you start watching this whole pulling, then everything just becomes a little bit different, doesn't it? So it's trying to keep the straightest back. I do tend to tell them to look up. And as soon as they explode off the block, I'm telling them to look for the wall behind them, like the furthest wall, just to get that arch in the back. And then just fly kick himself into the first kick. But I think it can get overcomplicated sometimes. And I think a lot of coaches see drills being done, but don't understand the reason why they're doing them on the backstroke stuff. But it goes back to what I've said before. Like I think the first week is I don't tend to actually focus too much on drills, because I just feel you should do a lot of the stuff that you're doing normal swimming, if you know what I mean. Like you try and correct something in the full flow, like you're not going to do 3/4 catch up, are you? Swimming in freestyle sprinting or anything like that, like and all that sort of thing. So I tend to, there's a lot of elements where we do drills, but very simple. I have like 2 or 3 drills that I go to, and that's about it. Everything else, it's just focusing on the actual full movement together and making connecting the dots and using video feedback, getting the kids to actually sort of like film each other with the phones, which I don't know if that's allowed or not, and I'm going to get in trouble for that, but like get them all to film on phones, and then just come around. So like a lot of peer-to-peer mentoring, your coaching, we do that on a Friday night, and they just get to see the start position, see the effects of what it's having, and just see them all connecting and talking a little bit more.
Sorry, one thing we're using in terms of, we don't always have ledges, we don't always have a pad. I think a backstroke start, a pad versus a slippy wall. There's some pools where I'd look and go, there's not even any point. I don't think there's a problem starting out the gutter, because on race day, if you've got a decent pad, it's the same effect. Or you've got a ledge in, it's the same effect. But I like the idea of them having something to that grip. One drill we use every now and again, I get them to use a towel, and I get the partner to dangle the towel over the top of the edge of the block. They do a backstroke start holding the block, and the towel drops down between the block and the swimmer. And that allows them, once it's in the water, it just allows them a little bit of grip on the wall, so they can get that extra propulsion. Almost replicates what they'll feel like when they're in the race, and it's dead easy to do. But when we're talking about the drills, when we're talking about drills like backstroke start drills, I like the backflip drill, because it teaches them about that explosion and really throwing the head back. There's a video knocking about on Instagram. I think it's Georgia Davis doing like a backstroke progression. So she does a backstroke where backstroke start, she goes up and then sort of folds in half and goes in bum first. Then she does a backflip off the block, and all the kids are saying, "Lee, can we try that one?" You're like, no, because someone will end up going to bloody A&E with a smashed head or whatever. But actually, I think that backflip drill, in terms of promoting height and promoting the ability to get up out the water, I think is brilliant. The one thing I'd say though, and we haven't really touched on it yet, backstroke for me, the best backstrokers aren't necessarily the fastest backstroke swimmers. The best backstrokers tend to be the best fly kickers, because it's more so than anything else. That you look at Kira Toussaint, you look at, Tankot was brilliant at it.
Manadu's, what's it called? World record short course is backstroke, isn't it? Like, he's got the 50-meter short course backstroke world record.
Yeah.
And
30 meters of it is underwater.
Yeah, he swims to 20 meters. Over half of that is under the water, and he's incredible under the water on that video, and that's what wins it. And it's the same thing, sort of like we try and get out to the kids. It's like, if you're going to win a 50, you need to be amazing on that second 25 underwater. You have to be. Yeah. You can't just go up at 6 meters and think you're going to win it. You've got to kick. But then again, I feel training backstroke as well becomes very anaerobic, and that's where you start losing the rate of the swim. So even trying to implement that, honestly, and this is the thing, I can't say I produce any decent backstrokers. I think the fastest I've had is that a girl last year, go 220 long course, but she literally went 110. And then she went on the 100, she went 108. That's the best she could do. And I think a lot is just down to the work that we were doing at the time. It was just a lot of even splitting, constantly kicking out to 15. But getting to slow down, because we were working short course, getting to slow down into the wall. Or when she actually, Joe, focus on the transition, focus on the breakout. She got 10 minutes to breathe before she starts kicking to 15 meters again. Joe, on sort of like 50 repetitions or something like that. So even when sort of like I'm trying to think about how to encourage kicking to the 15, but not knocking them to a point where they're actually going to be blowing out their ass because they can't physically hold it for so long because they're spending over half of the distance underwater. I'm still trying to figure out a little bit, and that's where I feel, for me, I hate long course training. I think it's useless. I think everyone gets too hooked up on it. I think it's just a selling point of the program. Oh, I've got 50 meter, cool. No one gives a damn. But that's where I would say backstroke would be better to train in long course than it would do to short course, because you've got so much time to repay the oxygen debt, and you can still keep in the system that you want to keep in without forcing them up. I think it's quite key. So I'm still trying to figure that out. Yeah, and I don't know if any of you boys got any.
I mean, it's quite simplistic there. To ask them to come up. I know you want to work on that underwater phase. So if they're doing a freestyle air, what I don't know what it is. You can position what, when, and and how they do the underwater phase. I've done it before where they've had fins on, and kids are doing 15 meters underwater because they can, because they got the fins on, and then doing 2 token efforts on the drill, and then they're at the wall, turning, 4 meters out, and it's like, what's the point? So it's on some sets, I just literally say, push to the surface, no kicks. So yes, you're taking away that skill element of it, but you are making sure that whatever you're doing, you've got more chance of doing it in the short course pool, whether it be yards, 25 meters. That's the way. Some of the ways I do it. I don't do it all the time, but I do use that as a simplistic method.
I think
to trying to, particularly because I love 200 backstroke. I love working the kids, particularly around 200 backstroke if they're ever doing any backstroke aerobic work. But I'm always trying to emphasize that let's kick out at least 10 meters, feet past a 10 or your head past a 10 sort of thing. But then as we're doing repeats going through, I'm just like, ooh, like I can see the degradation in the stroke coming. I can see them
Odds,
popping
evens.
well, this is talk about, and it's something as simple I didn't even think about until where one of our coaches said it last week. Is I'm looking at mixing free and aerobic, free and because I do a lot of just freestyle sets, and he's like, "What? And why don't we do Joe? I say 150s as 50 free, 25 as backstroke and kicking out, and that's a focus on the backstroke and kicking out. Then they can repay the oxygen debt over the consecutive 50 on the free, and then they can kick out again and just maintain that rhythm." Then knowing me, because I would get into that, I'll see it works for the first time, then try and repeat it over and over and over again, and it will just stop having an effect. And so I don't know, it's just trying to maximize the amount of tools and things you can go to, you can pull out when you need to. And I think maybe that's where I'm personally struggling, trying to emphasize that point I'm trying to get home to the kids without it becoming too stale of doing the same stuff. Does that make sense? Because I do feel backstroke can become a very anaerobic stroke to work on. I'm just not a fan of encouraging just kicking to the flags. Like I really want to hammer home, like they've got to be kicking like 4, 5, 6 kicks underwater out. They've got to get used to that rhythm, because even the rhythm of the underwater fly kick is a lot different to any other stroke you see. It's a lot more controlled. It's a lot deeper. It is a lot longer. Like it's bigger movements. It's bigger energy movements, isn't it? So I don't know. Yeah. Again, I'm just going off on a tangent.
My take on backstroke kicking, and as a 200 backstroke swimmer myself, I've always had I had a better base knowledge of backstroke training than I did anything else when I started coaching. So naturally, my first 2 really good national swimmers were backstrokers. One thing that I disagree with on the anaerobic factor is it doesn't have to be. It can be developed. Now, I did a lot of my aerobic work on backstroke. If we were doing 3100s, I mean, we didn't do a huge amount of aerobic work, but if we were doing like a set of, let's say 10 200s or 31s would be a sort of a really, really big set, I'd do it on backstroke. My coach would say, I don't want to see any of them less than, if you go less than 12 and a half on any of these turns, we'll start the fucker again. And I once had to start again at rep 26 of 31s, and we did. And you know what? Over time, I mean, that was towards the end of me before I packed it in. No, but that was when I was used to doing that. But we started off saying, I want every turn to be 7.5 meters, every turn, and then a month of that, right, we're going to 8.5 meters, and just build it and build it slowly. And I think what we were saying there, we were talking about that, they call it like that Hungarian model of half, 50-50, free and back for aerobic work, because what better way to develop your aerobic capabilities than swimming with your face out so you can breathe whenever you like? Makes sense. But you can still do that, and you can still have, and the kids that want it, the kids that want to be backstrokers will want to go more. And they need to find a way of kicking easy. I want to say that I was much bigger and longer with the kicks than some of the guys I was racing, because I practiced it. Like I say, excuse me, I wasn't the fastest backstroke swimmer, but I was sure as shit the fastest fly kicker. And that was why, we used to joke about it. And even when I moved to Salford, I used to get in and race at like club champs. When I first started swimming there, Adam will probably remember. And the young lads, we had a really, really good fly swimmer, like 13-year-old British record and that sort of gear. And he'd say, I'll race you to 15. And I was like, you've got no chance, mate. And even though I'd stopped swimming then, that's a skill that was so practiced that it becomes almost more important than the swim itself. And I think kicking easy and finding a way of lengthening that kick out and allowing them to get to 10 meters every turn, then 15 meters every turn. I think sometimes we can be scared of it. If we make it out like it's a big thing to say, go to 15 meters on an underwater phase, do you get scared of it? Like 200 fly. Do you know what I mean? Like a 200 fly, if a kid gets to about 14 years old and has never competed to 200 fly, they're scared to death of it. If you get a kid to do it when they're 9 or 10, it's nothing, because they don't know to be scared of it yet. And I think it's maybe a program thing that if you teach those guys, I want this far off every wall, this is how we do it, they never knew any different. And I'm not, we don't do that enough. And I'm recognising we don't do enough of that. But I would like to see if these guys are going to be backstrokers, or at least give them the tools to potentially try and get there. Like I say, it is possible.
Give them the time to do so. So if you would normally do 100 backstroke with your senior guys of 130, 25, whatever you can do, start, or even the tiddlers, start them off 3 minutes if they're doing hundreds. Build it up. I mean, I've done sets where I've gone 5 meters, feet past the flags, 10 meters, feet past the flags, 15 meters, and they're having to go 15 meters off the last wall, or they do that for a 200 or a 300 rep, and it's just building it up. So can you deliver the skills in the last wall? You've seen Litchfield do it recently. Last wall kicking out to 15 or 12 at the Greenbank. Up to 13, 14 meters off the last wall.
Yeah. Do you remember Craig McNally, Scottish lad?
Craig McNally, you said. Yeah. He used to race Luke. He raced Luke.
Yes. Yeah. And he used to swim 150. He used to swim 150 meters, and he'd be 5 meters down on the whole field in like British finals, and then he destroyed them on the last length. But that all came from an enormous back 15, first 15 of the back 50, and then he'd use all. It was like he was just sitting on it. It was almost like an athletics race. Do you remember watching it?
I can't wait to talk fly next week, because obviously we on a similar kind of point. The last 50 or the last 75 in the 200 fly, amount of swimmers we've had. I know you had Elliot as well, who maybe swam it slightly differently, and same with Doolan. But the likes of Ewan Wilson, likes of Joe recently, Ben Kerry, come 75 meters behind, 15 meters behind, and he still wins the 201. And I can't wait to talk, because it's the way. Obviously it's the technique that we do, but also the tactics toward the 200 fly. You've got to have things in place. But hopefully, we'll talk about that another week.
That's the thing I was going to say the other week, though, is I feel a lot of that comes from the and backstroke is what a lot of people forget about is breathing, like your breathing pattern, the way you actually are breathing on when you put your face out the water. A lot of swimmers aren't aware of what they're doing. And how they're setting themselves up. So I'm amount of times I've seen people like speed up in the wall and start going, and it's like you're fucked. Like, sorry again, pardon French. You're screwed kicking into that last turn, mate. Like you're absolutely screwed. You've got to relax. You've got to really move yourself into it more fluid, with a more rhythmic movement to get that correlating effect off the wall. So again, it goes back to John. We're doing freestyle, man. For me, like a pivotal part of swimming is breathing pattern and regularity of breathing. And I think that's more prominent on backstroke than anything else. Because again, if you're spending 15 meters underwater, you just watch them pop up and it disrupts everything. So like they're taking that first breath really, or that first stroke under the water, aren't they? They're not breathing first stroke. They're breathing on the second stroke. Like, it's the same thing. Like you try and encourage them like, not to breathe on the first stroke. And we still try and say that to them on backstroke, like you're breathing on the second stroke, like that first stroke's engaging underwater, relax and let it come through a little bit more naturally. That transition through has such a direct impact.
Do you know what? No, you've just reminded me something else. I tell the swimmers, you know, about when we talked about head position, about having that head a little bit further back. I say on backstroke, I say when you break the surface, the first thing that comes out needs to be your lips, because you're like that. Give me some oxygen. As in, so if you're down here, you've got to wait even longer to get that breath in. If you're there and your lips are coming out first, like that, and okay, it's funny and they all laugh about it, but it's a brilliant way of describing it. It's coming up there, and you're on that breath as soon as you break the surface.
Yeah. No, to be fair, actually, I'm going to use that because it's something I always say I want to see top of the shoulder and the nose, and I always have a joke, obviously, because I've got quite a large nose. Joe Middle European nose, and I was like, well, if I swim backstroke, my nose is already sticking out whilst I'm kicking under the water.
I thought that was what shark fin drill was.
Well, just mine.
Oh God, sorry. Has anyone from the room got anything that you want to ask on today's? I mean, we've got the WhatsApp group if anyone wants to throw any questions in there or feedback, but has anybody got anything they'd like to bring in today?
Lee?
Hi.
It's in regards to your take on reducing rotation on backstroke, because I always thought that if you had rotation in backstroke, you reduce the stress on the arm stroke, so then improve the more power through backstroke. But it was just the interesting aspects on your the reduction of hip rotation.
Right. I talk about.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. I need to qualify that. I'm not looking for reduction in rotation at the shoulders. I'm looking at the shoulders and the hips having less. Yeah. So I'm trying to keep the hips as flat as I can while still promoting that rotation. So instead of the rotation being a whole body, I want the rotation to come from the trunk.
Yeah. Do you not find that it reduces the power if you have it more flat in the hips? Do you find that it reduces the shoulder power or puts more stress if you reduce the rotation?
That's kind of what you want on a 50 and 100, don't you? That's what we were talking about. It's a quite higher impact and there's more stress put upon the joints and the shoulders. So I would choose when to do that. I agree with Lee in terms of not reducing it, not getting rid of it, but minimalizing the hip rotation. Because again, if you're literally rocking and rolling like that, yes, you're taking the pressure away, but ultimately you're taking away the power and the speed. So I think it's about when you would integrate that into your training model, and definitely for a race, I would be promoting that for more of a 50 or hybrid version for the 100, and then obviously the 100, the hips probably could go a little bit more.
Yeah, it's just made me think a bit more about it now.
I think it's down the lines of, is it natural rotation? Is it forced rotation? When you start telling them to push from the hips, they end up forcing the rotation. So they're almost going sideways and they're on the side, and they take longer to go around. That's going to affect your rate of speed of the arms. If it's a natural rotation, it's still going to be rotating. It's still going to be sort of like they're still going to be working in conjunction with each other, the arms and the legs, or sorry, the shoulders and the hips. But I think it's how the kids processing it in regards to, are they forcing that rotation or are they just naturally letting it happen? It's being aware. So maybe it's thinking about the terminology from all of us.
Can I just give you a point to think about there? I always think about, Lee, I'll let you come in a minute, I will, honest. I think about a beat of a drum. So like if Noel was doing that, boom, 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 boom. And if that's your rate on a 50, whereas you really want to be boom, 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 boom. And it's the rhythm and the drum in a swimmer's head, in any stroke really. And I think if you can get them to think about increasing that rate and having that drum rhythm a little bit more and linking that to the rotation and the different speeds of that rotation or distances of rotation, I think that's a way of linking that to the swimmer a little bit easier.
Cool runnings, isn't it? Field down.
I've got just one point regarding why I talk about that twist in the trunk and trying to keep the hips still. Well, sorry, 2 points. The first one is trying to keep the hips flat means that the kick can just go straight up and down. That's the most effective, rather than dealing with side forces. We can just literally work up and down, which is, for me, the most effective way to kick. But what I'd also say is that twist through a stable hip position and what we can do through the trunk, for me, increases the tension in the trunk. And what I mean by that is, if you're already increasing tension in the body, it makes a stiffer platform that arm's attached to. So you can actually generate more power. If your bodies are all relaxed and the core's loose, you're not going to put that power will dissipate through the stroke. Whereas if it's really tense and there's a lot of, is it torque? It's like torque in a car, isn't it? If there's a lot of tension in that body, then this powerful lever that's acting upon it, this is really tight. It's going to push everything through. Yeah, it's that connection. So actually, what that maybe that's another reason why I do it that I hadn't really thought about until there. So, like I say, John, thank you for asking the question. But in terms of that tension around the core, if that forces the body to be tighter, so that the arm that's moving and the legs that are attached to it, the more solid your chassis, the more benefit that the power you're putting through is going to have on forwards movement.
Great, yeah, thanks. Brilliant.
Anybody else got anything for us? Heather?
Lee, I just want to see you tilt the camera up and put your arm in that position again. It looked like it was someone else's arm.
But this one up here.
It just, the way you had it before, it looked like it was like just an arm independent of your body.
Just keeps going. That's what makes a good backstroke, and having arms that just come off and go around the back. Yeah. Go on, Heather.
In all the presentations that you've given so far, you all talk about your go-to drills. Would you be able to maybe put in the WhatsApp group what your go-to drills are for each stroke?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, well, I can speak for myself when I say I've probably got on video somewhere. I've got that much video footage of swimming that I forget what I have and haven't got. But I think between here and next week, certainly, I'll go over the strokes we've covered and look at some of mine, and I'm sure the lads will be able to do the same. If we share that in the WhatsApp group, then we can discuss those. But yeah, I think that'd be, and like I say, I'm more than happy to share. I mean, most of my stuff's on my YouTube channel, but I have got stuff on other strokes that I haven't necessarily put on there. But yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea.
I'll hold my hands up. I don't have any video footage. I'm a total technophobe. I have used video footage, but then I don't keep it. I just use it for the purpose on that day. I haven't, selfishly or not, I haven't shared this before. It's the first time I think any of us have kind of done anything like this. So, but I'm more than happy to discuss and talk about what I go through.
It doesn't necessarily need to be a video thing, but just what your go-to drills are. We all have those drills that we sometimes seem to be stuck in a rut with, and it'd be just nice to hear everybody else's perspective.
I always think, again, going to drills, I always think about why are you doing it. I know Noel says he very rarely uses it, he likes the full stroke. I like integrating it in different points of the cycle, the working week cycle, and also points within the season that I'll drop certain things off and put things in. But it depends what the desired effect of, whether it's feel, going from slow, medium and fast, whether it's height in the water, whether it be kind of fast recovery speed, the seated drill. Again, it's whether it's feel and kind of like power, kind of strength to power to body weight ratio, with things like simple single arm drills or variations of single arm drills, kick rotation, body position drills. Again, it just depends for me what your desired outcome is on that given day, to complement what you're doing in the working week.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I think that's a one for weekend, bit of homework, and I'm sure Lawrence will have some footage that he'll have tons he'll like to share, I'm sure. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Anybody got anything else for us, or are we all right to call that day this week? I think. Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, guys. Thanks very much for your time today. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think I'd like to hear Lawrence's thoughts, and I'm sure he'd like to chuck that in on the speed side of things, maybe to start the next session, and then we can have a look at what the next topics will be. If anyone's got any requests on topics, please feel free to throw them in the WhatsApp group, because it means we don't have to rack our brains thinking about what will be entertaining for you to listen to. So yeah, feel free to add any suggestions in there as well. Okay, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lee.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Great.
Ta-ra.
Thank you.